Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Have you ever heard of a term called make-suring? Today we dive into this term coined by Dr. Jennifer Dragonette to describe our frantic attempts to control situations or emotions beyond our control. Though often well-intentioned, we explore how this behavior can lead to unintended consequences, especially within families and relationships. Dr. Jen sheds some light on how this behavior can inadvertently undermine the competence of others, leading to feelings of resentment and power struggles. I share a few personal stories about the balancing act of managing a large family like I do, and Dr. Jen offers some practical advice on how to shift from controlling behaviors in big families to more supportive approaches. We also touch upon how these concepts apply beyond the family settings, especially in career transitions and times of emotional stress. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. So Dr. Jen, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
So I want to pull on a thread that we last picked up from our last conversation around this term that you have called make-suring. So I think probably to start us off is explain again like what you mean by make-suring, and then we'll kind of get into it from a therapist, behavioral, psychological standpoint and how it kind of ties into financial planning and just family dynamics overall, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So make-suring isn't a real word, although if I have my way, I'm going to make it be a real word.
I was going to say, you should probably get this trademarked.
I know. Well, funny enough, my son has copyrighted it, so I'll tell you the story in his mind.
Smart kid.
He's a smart kid. So make-suring is a term that I started using in my clinical practice about 11 years ago because I felt like it described this phenomenon that I see so often with people. So I'll tell you the story of how the word came about and then we can relate it. And I did tell this story on the last podcast. So if anybody heard that one, you can skip 30 seconds ahead here. But when my kids were little, so I have 2 boys, they're now 13 and almost 11. And when they were about 1 and 3, I came in the room and I saw my 1-year-old standing up, just, barely able to stand, doing that kind of wobbly baby stand. And his older brother was just dancing in circles around him, like with his hands up, as though he was trying to, magic him or do something. And I said, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm make-suring he doesn't fall down." And I thought, oh my goodness, that's the word for what we do as humans when we are frantically trying to control something that we actually have no control over. Because in what world could that 3-year-old keep a 1-year-old from just collapsing to the ground, right? But he was expending so much energy doing that and really thought that he was helping. And I started thinking about that word in terms of what we adults often do with our spouses, with our friends, even sometimes with our children. And I'll come back to children because there are ways that we kind of need to do this as parents. But make sureing is just part of our parlance. If we can start listening for that word, I always say it's kind of like putting our make sureing glasses on. We'll hear it all over the place. So, Paul, I just want to make sure that you remember our appointment today. Honey, I want to make sure that you don't forget to get the milk I asked you for. I want to make sure I didn't hurt your feelings. I want to make sure we're still good, right? And oftentimes we're double checking on something, or we're reminding somebody of something, or we're kind of taking away their ability to be competent. And that's where the problem comes in, is when I'm make sureing somebody, first and foremost, it's not very effective. It doesn't usually work. I'm usually trying to do something that they need to be doing for themselves. And it gives the impression that I don't think they can do it, even if I'm trying to be helpful, even if I'm trying to really show up. And we see this behavior, it's really very well intended. People are trying to be kind, but they're kind of taking someone else's job. And it can lead to a lot of resentments on both sides. And that's where it becomes really problematic. When I make sureing, hey, Paul, I reminded you 5 times to remember this thing. If you forget it, now I'm resentful because I overextended or I did something that was out of my comfort zone. And you might feel resentful too, because it's like, gosh, Jen, don't you know I can remember these things on my own? I'm an adult, right? So it's a tricky behavioral pattern that we often fall into. It's copyrighted in theory because several years ago I was telling my son that I was doing this and he said, well, I made up that word, and he took a napkin and he wrote copyright on it. So copyright Gavin, that is his word.
So I'm interested, do those two boys, are those two boys still looking out for each other that way?
They look out for each other, and I will say that they're really good about letting each other do their own stuff too, because it's one of these things that, like I said, once I have those make sureing glasses on, we just talk about it in our household. That might be something that he can do on his own, right? Or that might be something that I need to figure out on my own and make my own mistakes and take my own consequences for those mistakes so I can actually learn something.
It's interesting how you've kind of phrased that, like with adults, because I know that it's something that Teresa and I, we get after each other sometimes on this, because I hate to be reminded of things, and she is the consummate, like, making sure everything with 4 kids. I think with bigger families, this is probably an even bigger issue, because you're going in so many different places that you just need to, now it's going to be hard not to say this, like, make sure that everybody's in the right spot at the right time, so none of these balls that we're juggling get dropped.
Exactly. Well, and there's a good example in there of how this can evolve over time and how it really needs to evolve over someone's lifespan. So we're thinking about parenting. We need to make sure, quite literally, that our babies stay alive.
Right.
We need to make sure they eat. We need to make sure they get clean. We need to make sure they have something to do. We need to make sure they sleep. So we need to do a lot of make sureing. And I think that's why we have this biological drive to do that, is there are times that we literally are responsible for someone else's survival. However, when that baby becomes 7 years old, we don't need to make sure that they sleep. Right? They probably sleep pretty well, right? At least they need to sleep. We don't need to make sure they use the potty. Right? We need to make sure that our 2-year-old uses the potty, but not our 7-year-old. And then when that person becomes 15 or 16 or 17, we don't need to make sure nearly as much as we did when they were younger. But sometimes we don't evolve in that way with our children. And so that can also lead to a lot of power struggles, a lot of real hurt feelings and resentments, again, on both sides, if we're parenting our older child as though they're a younger child. So when I'm talking with adults about this, that's the analogy I often use is, are we treating our partner, our older children, sometimes even our adult children, as though they're quite a bit younger? Because that's what that make sureing feels like. That's why we as adults push back on it so much, even unconsciously when we feel it. Like you were saying, sometimes you feel from your partner, right? We often do, and that's no slam on Teresa. We often do this to our partners. But it feels like we're being infantilized. We're not seen as a competent person. And that's never the intention of the person who's doing the make sureing, right?
So I'm visualizing this because, like, I've been working a lot with families that have their kids going away to college for the first time, they're freshmen. And I can only imagine like what that's like being able to let go. But even like I think of like the high school years where there's this fine line between making sure that the kids are in tune to like what they need to do versus being able to step back and say, okay, you need to kind of figure this out on your own because I'm not going to be here to be, keep figuring this out for you. And I'm thinking like school structures, like we have the hardest time with like a few of our kids, like using a planner. And they're like, well, Dad, my teacher puts it in, my Skyward app or whatever. But I try to keep reminding them like, that's not how it's going to be next year in high school. Like you need to find a better way. And it usually falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, right. And I think part of what you're getting at with your kids is the idea of consequences. And this is a tough word because we love our kids. We don't want them to have all sorts of bad consequences. However, I know if you think back over your life, and I certainly can do this with my life, most of my major learning experiences in the real sense of learning, more than just in school, have been because I messed something up or I had a consequence or I thought I could do something on my own and maybe I figured out that I needed support in a different way. And so if people come in and protect me from all of that, I don't get to learn that. And then I do have pretty serious consequences later on when, maybe I don't have the support of those people around me. So it's really hard. It is kind of a leap of faith sometimes to let the people around us make their own decisions. And exactly like you're saying, it's tricky with kids because we have to ascertain where are they in that developmental plane, right? Sometimes we're ahead of them or they're ahead of where we think they are. And so we might not get it right, and that's okay. But I see all of this as a real learning opportunity that if I let people figure things out for themselves, with scaffolding or support if they need it or if they ask for it. And I think that's the other piece is we can train our kids. We can work with people to ask for the help if they need it rather than assuming and jumping in, make sure everything's going okay without checking in. Would you like some support? Because let's say your kiddo doesn't learn how to use the planner or doesn't keep on top of their schoolwork. That will make itself clear over time. And then we understand, okay, you needed more support here. But it really is kind of a sit on your hands. I'm doing this for those of you who aren't watching live, right? Sit on your hands and kind of let the people around you show you what they can do, show you what kind of help and support they really need.
So when you're talking with families about this specific topic, like have you found ways to guide them to what I guess you're always looking to take action, but in this case, it's like you wanting to take inaction, I guess, if that's the right phrase, right?
Sometimes it is. I like to think of a few different questions, kind of thought questions that I ask my clients a lot when we're thinking about, is this a make-suring behavior? Is this you just being a really good parent or good partner? I like to, first of all, say, what's your intention? What's your intention here? So if you're deciding, do I jump in or help? And a lot of my clients know that if their response starts with, well, I just want to make sure that, I'm going to be like,
yeah.
Try again. Or maybe that's good information. Do you need to make sure that that's going to happen? What would be the outcome if you didn't jump in and make sure that this was going to go a certain way? Because we often can't actually make it go in that direction, right? I also like to ask a question that goes something like this. If you could say anything and it wouldn't be wrong, what would you say and who would you say it to? And typically we come up with some answer in our minds. So I'll just ask that again and we can all just think for a second. If we could say anything and it wouldn't be wrong, what would you say and who would you say it to? Now, it doesn't mean that we have to say that thing to someone, but it does mean that that might be a boundary that we wish we could set. That might be a conversation that we feel nervous about having. And so if we go into that, well, why are you nervous about saying that? Or what would make it important that it couldn't be wrong? Because that's the most important part of that question. Maybe there's some make-suring in there. Well, gosh, if I knew that this person's feelings wouldn't be hurt, I would say this, but I couldn't because I don't want to make them upset. So we might be make-suring that they don't get upset. And is that really my responsibility? Is that my right? Because I think it's actually a mark of extreme respect to say, I'm going to tell you the information I need to tell you. You get to feel how you feel. about it. I can't control that. It doesn't actually feel good to you if I try to control your reaction or your experience. And so it is kind of sometimes exactly what you said of a conscious inaction or a deliberate just waiting, letting someone be, letting someone live and make their choices, and then being around to support if they want help or if they need help after the fact.
So I don't know if this applies or not, but I was just thinking about this, is that we've been focused on the family aspects of this, but I have a lot of people going through different career transitions right now. And so I'm wondering if this is applicable to somebody's in a career issue. And I know I'm not phrasing this question right, Jen, but I wonder if there's some kind of connection there. Do you have conversations? Does this come up with people that are, struggling with their career? Maybe they've been laid off, or maybe they're looking for a new career. Like, how is there a dynamic here in play that people should know about or be aware of?
There certainly could be. And, one distinction, and I'm grateful for the question because I think it highlights the distinction. Make sure what I'm using that word to talk about is with other people. So, if we're in a career transition, for example, or if somebody's been laid off, there are a lot of things that we have to do. There are a lot of things that we might add to a to-do list, or maybe we need to revamp our resume or make connections or, go out into the world and learn what this field is all about now because we've been out of the job hunt for a while. And that's not what I think of as make sureing. Those are tasks. Those are goals. Those are to refer back to one of our previous episodes. Those are things that we want to do and align with our values, that move toward our values. Make sureing would be, I need to make sure that my partner feels okay about all this. I need to make sure that, that I made the best impression possible on that interviewer. And so by going above and beyond and reaching out 5 times to make sure I made a good impression, I actually ended up making a bad impression. Right. So make sureing is more like I'm trying to control your human emotional experience of me, of this situation. And it doesn't usually work. That's the problem.
So I think what I picked up on there is there's like a clear delineation between the emotional side of it and the, call it like task management side of it. Like, I need to make sure I get my resume put together and out there versus what you just mentioned.
Right. Because imagine, we're thinking of adults now. Imagine that there's a couple and one person's been laid off and they're looking for work. How on earth could they possibly make sure their partner feels okay about this? Right? We really can't. And in fact, it's respectful and loving to let our partners have the feelings that they have. Maybe our partner is scared and they are allowed to feel scared. Maybe they're angry and they're allowed to feel angry. And if I try to make sure that you're not angry, I'm going to probably make you more angry.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Teresa and I have been through this before, and it's something I try to take that experience when I'm working with a family that's going through that, especially now during the holidays. Like, unfortunately, I know like 5 or 6 people now that have been affected by this. And it's one, I think we've even brought this up before. Maybe I brought it up with Dr. Taryn Clark, who's a regular, about, it's one thing to get laid off. It's another thing to lose your job like during the holidays. And that I think makes it even more emotional.
It's true. And, part of why make sureing doesn't feel good to the recipient is because it really harkens back to that idea of competence. That we as humans, we want to be seen as competent. And typically we are pretty competent, even if we've been laid off, even if some horrible thing has happened to us. We are, for the most part, competent, viable people. And when someone's make sureing us, let's take that same couple. One person has lost their job or has been laid off, and the partner is I just want to make sure you're okay. I just want to make sure you're not too worried. I want to make sure we're going to make it through this, right? A little bit of that, right? Okay, good. I'm glad we're okay. But so much of that, or an overdose of make sureing toward that person, is going to make them feel like, gosh, maybe I'm not okay, right? Should I be worried about this, right? Does my partner think I won't get another job? And I know we've talked a little bit around the concept of attachment. When we have a secure attachment to someone, whether it's our parents or our partner, 2 conditions are really met. We're seen and known and loved as we are, and we're seen as competent. It's that important to be securely attached to someone that we feel competent. And to me, that's the real problem with make suring, is that it gives the impression that I can't manage my own emotions. It gives the impression that I am actually not a competent person. And then we bring up all the defenses, right? Let me prove to you that I'm competent. Let me prove to you that I've got this. And, we can see the spiral kind of unfolding.
Yeah, because I know like going through a situation like this, there's certain things that you want to talk to your spouse or partner about, and then there's certain things like you it's not that you can't, but you know that it will cause more harm than good, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking of like, I think there's this interesting dynamic when somebody goes through this. I know we're kind of getting a little off topic, but I think it's certainly on topic for a lot of conversations I've been having with families, like I mentioned, that are going through this, is that you want your spouse or partner to be supportive, but you also don't want to use them as a punching bag and venting like your frustrations, because that doesn't help you or them. And even being in like groups of people that are going through a job loss, like the last thing you want to do is be in a group where all they do is vent about how bad everything is. Like you want to get out of that situation as fast as possible and find a new group. It's really interesting of a process of trying to find the right people to be able to help support you through a very difficult time, because what I've seen is like if you're around that kind of negativity, or you're around people that will just let you go, like vent and vent and vent, it doesn't help you get to where you want to go or closer to a solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it can be really important and helpful to say, what do you actually need, right? What kind of support do you need? Or for the person in need of support to say, I need to vent for a few minutes and then I would just love to be distracted. Yeah. Right? Or I would love to hear if you've experienced this. That's what I'm actually getting at. I want to vent so I know I'm not alone. So the idea of what's your intention? I really mean that, kind of thinking it through, not the intention for the next 30 seconds. What's your intention for this conversation? What do you need from me? Or how can I actually support you? It's a much nicer way of approaching that make suring dynamic, to say, how can I support you right now? Versus, I'm going to decide what kind of support you need and I'm going to make sure you get it. Right? Do you see the difference?
Yeah, that's complete. Yeah, I can see where you're going with. Yeah, that does not work.
It doesn't work. And the part of the problem with that is there's a subtle implication that I know better than you. Right? I'm going to make sure that the support I think you need. It's a little arrogant, right? And I say this as someone who still does it from time to time. So it's not that we're all arrogant people, but it's this idea of, well, I know you just need this, or you just need that. It can be slightly invalidating or even minimizing, and we might miss it. Maybe we're totally off because we're actually really bad mind readers as humans. We don't know what other people need. Even psychologists do not mind read very well. And so we ask, and that's a much better approach. And then maybe it just turns out that person doesn't need anything from us. They just need us to be there, or they just need kindness or eye contact or physical presence or space.
What's really now becoming interesting to me during this conversation is I can see myself on one hand how I interact with my own family, and I make sure probably a lot, like too much. But then when I'm working with my TAMA families with their financial plans, with their personal lives, I try to not make sure, because I think I understand the dynamics there a little bit more, because if I'm going that route, not only emotionally, but like even like task generated, like make sure you do this, make sure you do like I could sense that doesn't help anybody. Again, I forget how you just described it, but I'm taking away something from them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. You're kind of taking away their ability to be competent without you.
Yes. So I'm like, I blanked on that. I'm taking away their ability to be competent.
Right. Right. And it creates this kind of interdependence. And so, another word that I haven't used yet, but, another way I think about this is the word codependency. And, we often hear that term related to substance use, but it's
Right.
actually quite broad. But it came out of the substance use world for exactly this reason. I want to make sure you didn't drink today. I want to make sure that you're going to your meetings. I want to make sure you're okay. And it comes out of such fear, but we can create this dynamic where suddenly I can't do this without you. I'm going to blame you for my failures. We can kind of unspool that. And it's a really ineffective way of relating. And you're exactly right, Paul, that we often do it much more with our families, with our loved ones. Maybe we go to work and we get that emotional distance to say, oh, that's yours. That's your work to do, right? If you're, drinking, or if you're doing something that's not in your best interest, you're going to figure that out. You're going to have a consequence that'll help you figure that out. I'll be here to help you if you need my help, if you ask for it. But when it's our families, that's part of us, right? And so those good intentions just can go awry a little bit easier because we just love these people so much. We care about them so much. We don't want them to have a consequence. And so they might not be able to learn those things on their own quite as easily or quite as quickly.
One of the other things I'm thinking about, and I don't know how it ties into this, is that when somebody's going through something traumatic, like a job loss or end of a relationship, or anything like that, I know with my experience and working with others going through that experience, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's very high that people end up coming out of those situations better than they were going in. And I know with the work that you do as a clinical psychologist, like you've seen it time and time and time and again. Mm-hmm. How do you approach that to where you're not like telling them, like it kind of relates to this make sure, like, don't worry, I've dealt with all these situations before. I've had all these people go through what you're going through. You're going to be fine. You're going to be better off than you were before. Like people, like especially early on, people do not want to hear that. But how do you convey that to somebody that no, you're going to be okay eventually, but it's almost like you need to have these feelings, this anger, this animosity, whatever it may be, but know that there's a light at the end of this tunnel, even though it's pitch black right now. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most easy and subtle shifts is to just shift buts to and. So everything you just
say that again.
To shift a but to an and.
Okay.
So rather than things being either or, to really be able to hold and sometimes even on behalf of these folks, hold the reality of both. Right?
Hold two competing thoughts.
Yes, exactly. Right. You feel angry, you feel devastated, and there's hope. It's really subtle. And I almost said but, right? It's really subtle. And when we say and, we're allowing both things to be true. So if we say, no, this is really hard, but you're going to get through it, we're essentially negating that first part, right? It's not so hard. You're going to get through it. And it feels invalidating, even if our intention is to say, I so have faith in you, you're going to do great. So we hold both. And we can support people by saying, this is such a hard time, and I really have faith in you, right? I hear you saying you just feel desperate and hopeless. Totally hear that.
That is really that is super. Mm-hmm. That is super powerful.
Yeah, it's almost always true. Two things can be absolutely true at the same time, even if they seem opposite. We can be hopeless and hopeful, right? We can be devastated and have the strength to keep moving.
And I have to give you this big smile for those watching on our YouTube channel, because the one thing I'm thinking in my mind is like when you hold these two competing thoughts is like the portfolio management work that I do. Like long term, I'm very optimistic about the market, but that doesn't mean like in the short term, like I can't have a negative view. So it's like holding those two competing thoughts about, and just like in this situation, the here and now really sucks. And I have this belief that the future will be better than it is today.
Exactly. And just as you did that, I could feel that shift, right? Like, okay, yes, it's really hard right now. And we're going to keep moving forward because we don't think it's going to be hard forever. It instills hope, and it also validates where that person is. And the beauty of validating someone, and if that's a new word to anyone, I'll just quickly say validating doesn't mean I agree. It doesn't mean I like it. It doesn't mean I approve of it. It just means it is in fact what is happening. Right? So this is really hard right now. I can validate you're feeling really hard. You're feeling really sad. You're feeling really angry. When I validate someone's experience or feelings, they no longer have to defend it or argue with me about it. So if I say, I know this is really hard, but it's going to get better, what I'm doing to that person is I'm making them have to prove to me how hard it is. Because I just said, well, it's not actually as important as the second half of what I just said. And so then that person is going to just start telling me why it's so bad. And they're going to hear themselves telling me why it's so bad. And that's what they're going to believe, because we believe our own voice 1,000 times more than anybody else's.
Right.
I never want to put my clients, family, friends in the position of having to defend how hard things are to me. And we as parents unintentionally can do that to our kids. Oh, I know you lost your game, but hey, honey, it's going to be okay. You're going to, do better next game. Well, what if they're really sad about having lost that game? And so they need to tell us how hard it is. So now we're going to hear more of that because I just invalidated their emotions. And it really does tie into this whole concept of make sureing, because of course I don't want my loved ones to be sad. I want to make sure they're okay. But I can't, and I mean that, but I can't short circuit their emotional experience, right? They're going to have the feelings they're going to have. And if I validate them and allow them to be there, and I can sit on my hands and tolerate this person having their own sadness, then maybe they don't have to have it extra to prove to me how sad they are.
Wow. Like, this is the thing is, like, people listening and watching, like, Dr. Jen and I do not have this rehearsed at all. We come up with a single topic and we try to pull on that thread as far as, it goes. And then we end up going in, sometimes different directions. But this has been just an incredible conversation and covering a lot of things. But this is, I so enjoy these conversations, and I hope all of you listeners and watchers do as well, because Dr. Jen is just phenomenal. So I think that's probably a good place to put a pin in this conversation. And I'm sure this is probably not the last time we're going to talk about make sureing and these topics. So, Dr. Jen, thank you so much for being back on, and we'll look forward to seeing you in another month.
All right. Thanks so much, Paul.
I think the biggest takeaway for me in this conversation, and like most of the conversations I have with Dr. Jen, is how our emotions, our psychology, our behavior can impact our relationships, which in turn impact our financial decisions. As I've said over and over, our emotions drive our finances are driven by our emotions. That concept, that framework is structurally very sound. So this is why we spend so much time on this show talking about emotions and psychology and how it impacts our biggest relationships, not only with ourselves and money, but with our spouses, our partners, our kids, and the money conversations and scripts that we have with all of them. And I think this term called make sureing is just another example that Dr. Jen has brought to us to share why these conversations are so important and the impacts that they have on not only creating healthier relationships, but healthier relationships with money, with family, with friends, with our spouse, our partner, and our kids. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.